Stay in your place. You're just a janitor who empties trash cans.
CEO Amanda Sterling commanded sharply to Jerome Mitchell as he approached the executive conference table during Pinnacle Industries' quarterly board meeting, her ice-blue eyes flashing with irritation at the custodial worker who had dared to interrupt discussions about third-quarter profit margins with what appeared to be completely inappropriate interference in executive decision-making that had no connection to his janitorial responsibilities. At 46, Jerome possessed the kind of analytical precision that characterized both experienced engineers and observant maintenance workers, moving through corporate environments while processing technical details that others missed, which HVAC systems operated beyond safe parameters whose structural load calculations seemed inadequate for building modifications, whose cost-cutting measures compromised safety protocols in ways that could create catastrophic failure during stress events. But the metallic groaning sounds emanating from the building's primary support beams, combined with unusual vibration patterns in the ventilation system that his engineering background recognized as indicators of imminent structural failure, represented something far more dangerous than workplace boundary violations. The 40-story Pinnacle Industries Tower was experiencing systematic structural compromise that could result in partial collapse within hours if emergency evacuation and engineering intervention didn't occur immediately. "Ma'am, there's a critical problem with the building's structural integrity that requires immediate evacuation," Jerome said, his voice carrying the urgent authority he had once used when advising aerospace clients about system failures that could result in aircraft disasters. The HVAC load distribution is creating stress patterns that exceed the building's design parameters. At 34, Amanda Blake possessed the striking blonde beauty and inherited executive authority that had enabled her to maintain control of Pinnacle Industries through 3 generations of family ownership, though her success had required developing interpersonal distance rather than technical competence, making unexpected engineering warnings from service workers both professionally annoying and personally incomprehensible. "What did you just say to me?" Amanda replied, her voice carrying the controlled fury that successful executives used when subordinates violated established hierarchy through inappropriate expertise claims. "You're a janitor who empties trash cans, not an engineer qualified to make assessments about building safety." The dismissal was both predictable and potentially catastrophic, reflecting defensive anger that characterized people whose authority depended on maintaining social boundaries rather than technical knowledge, particularly when those boundaries were challenged by expertise that contradicted comfortable assumptions about professional competence and social hierarchy. "Ms. Sterling, I have professional experience in structural engineering and HVAC load analysis," Jerome continued, knowing that revealing his background would expose him to questions about his current employment that could affect his custody arrangement with his 14-year-old twins. The vibration patterns and acoustic signatures indicate that primary support systems are failing under loads they weren't designed to handle. "That professional experience," Amanda repeated, her voice carrying the skeptical contempt that privileged executives used when questioning credentials of service workers. What kind of professional experience could a custodial worker possibly have with structural engineering? The question forced Jerome to confront the most painful period of his recent life, when his divorce proceedings had required liquidating his successful aerospace consulting firm to pay legal fees and spousal support that had eliminated his ability to maintain professional licensing while fighting for custody of Marcus and Maya. "I was a licensed aeronautical engineer, specializing in structural systems for 15 years, before personal circumstances made it necessary for me to accept custodial employment," Jerome replied, using careful language that acknowledged his qualifications without providing details about financial destruction and family dissolution. Amanda studied his face with the analytical attention she brought to evaluating quarterly reports, recognizing something in his manner that contradicted her assumptions about maintenance workers, but unwilling to accept that building safety assessments from custodial staff could override executive meeting priorities and board member schedules. Even if you have some kind of engineering background, you have no authority to make claims about building safety or recommend evacuation procedures during confidential board meetings, Amanda said, her voice carrying the institutional authority that had protected her family's corporate control for 3 generations. The conversation was interrupted by a deep, metallic groaning sound that seemed to emerge from within the building's structure itself, followed by vibrations that made the conference room windows rattle and caused several board members to look up from their financial documents with expressions of concern that had nothing to do with quarterly profit margins. "What was that noise?" asked CFO Robert Hayes, his voice carrying the controlled alarm that characterized executives processing unexpected environmental disturbances that could affect both personal safety and corporate operations. "That was a primary support beam shifting under excessive load," Jerome replied, his engineering expertise making the acoustic signature immediately recognizable, even though most people would dismiss the sound as normal building settling or HVAC operation. "The building's structural integrity is compromised, and evacuation should begin immediately. You don't have authorization to recommend evacuation procedures," Amanda snapped, though her voice carried less certainty than her words suggested, since the building's obvious distress was creating environmental evidence that supported Jerome's technical assessment, regardless of his employment status or social position. "Ma'am, structural failure doesn't require authorization to cause catastrophic collapse," Jerome replied, drawing on emergency protocols he had developed for aerospace clients whose safety depended on immediate response to system failures rather than bureaucratic approval processes. The exchange was interrupted by a second, louder groaning sound that caused the conference table to vibrate noticeably, followed by what sounded like metal components adjusting under stress somewhere within the building's infrastructure, creating acoustic evidence that even non-engineers could recognize as potentially dangerous. "Should we consider postponing this meeting?" asked board member Catherine Rodriguez, her voice carrying diplomatic concern about continuing executive discussions in an environment that was producing increasingly alarming structural sounds. "We're not postponing a quarterly board meeting because of building noises and engineering claims from custodial staff," Amanda replied firmly, though her defensive posture suggested she was processing information that challenged her confidence about both building safety and Jerome's professional competence. The decision was tested almost immediately by a third metallic groaning that was both louder and longer than the previous sounds, accompanied by a distinct shifting sensation that made everyone in the room aware that something significant was moving within the building's structural framework. "Ms. Sterling, that sound indicates that steel support beams are deflecting beyond safe parameters," Jerome explained, using technical language that his aerospace background had made automatic for describing structural failures that required immediate intervention. "Continued loading will result in catastrophic failure that could collapse multiple floors." "Uda, how can you possibly know that from just listening to building sounds?" Amanda asked, her question carrying both skepticism and growing concern about environmental conditions that were becoming impossible to ignore or dismiss through executive authority. "Because I've spent 20 years analyzing structural acoustic signatures for aircraft and building systems that fail catastrophically when load limits are exceeded," Jerome replied, providing credentials that seemed impossible to reconcile with his current employment, but which were becoming increasingly relevant as the building continued producing evidence of systematic structural distress. Over the following 10 minutes, as the structural sounds became both more frequent and more alarming, while several board members expressed growing concern about personal safety and meeting continuation, Amanda realized that dismissing Jerome's expertise could result in personal and corporate catastrophe if his engineering assessment proved accurate. Mr. Mitchell, assuming your structural analysis is correct, what specific evacuation procedures would you recommend? Amanda asked, using his surname for the first time while acknowledging that crisis management might require accepting technical advice from sources she had previously dismissed as inappropriate. Immediate evacuation of floors 30 through 40, followed by systematic building evacuation starting from the top floors, Jerome replied, drawing on emergency protocols that his engineering experience had made automatic for managing structural failures in high-rise environments. As Amanda activated building-wide evacuation procedures while privately hoping that Jerome's engineering expertise was wrong about the severity of structural compromise, everyone involved understood that crisis management often required accepting advice from unexpected sources whose knowledge became crucial during emergencies that couldn't be resolved through established hierarchy or institutional authority. Some discoveries about imminent danger require recognizing that expertise can emerge from unlikely sources during crisis situations, and that protecting lives sometimes involves accepting technical knowledge regardless of social expectations about professional competence and workplace boundaries. The confrontation that would force both Jerome and Amanda to examine their deepest assumptions about professional competence and social hierarchy began at 7:30 a.m. the following morning, when Amanda arrived at the temporary Pinnacle Industries offices carrying comprehensive research on Jerome Mitchell's engineering background and a growing recognition that her dismissive response to his structural warnings might have reflected class prejudice rather than legitimate concerns about professional boundaries. "Mr. Mitchell," Amanda said as she found Jerome reviewing building evacuation reports in the emergency command center that had been established after structural engineers confirmed his assessment of catastrophic system failure. "I spent most of the night investigating your aerospace engineering credentials and the circumstances that led to your current employment with our custodial services." Jerome felt the familiar anxiety that accompanied any inquiry into his professional history, uncertain whether Amanda's research indicated respect for his expertise or preparation for legal complications that could affect his custody arrangement with Marcus and Maya if his ex-wife discovered that he hadn't disclosed his technical qualifications during their divorce proceedings. "Ms. Sterling, I understand that my warnings about building safety created disruption for your board meeting and corporate operations," Jerome replied, using careful language for acknowledging potential employment consequences while maintaining his conviction that preventing structural collapse had justified any professional boundary violations. "Mr. Mitchell, you weren't just an engineer," Amanda said, her voice carrying the controlled intensity that characterized executives processing information that challenged fundamental assumptions about social competence and professional hierarchy. "You were the founder of Mitchell Aerospace Consulting, with contracts for structural analysis on major commercial aircraft and government facilities." The recognition was both validating and potentially dangerous, confirming that Amanda now understood his qualifications, while inevitably leading to questions about why someone with his expertise and business success was working in custodial services rather than continuing to practice professionally in engineering or consulting environments. "Yes, ma'am, that's accurate. But I also need you to understand that my transition out of professional engineering involved legal circumstances that make my current employment both necessary for supporting my children and potentially problematic if certain aspects of my situation become public," Jerome said, his honesty about personal limitations both professionally vulnerable and ethically necessary. What kind of legal circumstances end the career of someone who owned a successful aerospace consulting firm? Amanda asked, her tone carrying business-like directness rather than judgment, suggesting she was seeking information for evaluation rather than personal curiosity about his private difficulties. The question required Jerome to revisit the most financially devastating period of his personal life, when his wife Sarah's decision to file for divorce had coincided with her demand for spousal support that required liquidating his business assets while legal fees for custody battles consumed his professional savings and eliminated his ability to maintain engineering licenses. My divorce required liquidating Mitchell Aerospace Consulting to pay court-ordered spousal support and legal fees that exceeded $400,000, Jerome said, his voice carrying controlled emotion about circumstances that had destroyed both his professional identity and his financial security. The custody battle for my twins lasted 18 months and consumed all remaining assets that could have been used to maintain professional licensing or start a new consulting practice. Amanda's expression shifted from business interrogation to human recognition of systematic legal destruction, understanding that she was confronting someone whose professional competence remained intact, but whose economic circumstances had been eliminated by legal proceedings rather than technical failure or business incompetence. I'm sorry your family dissolution created such extensive financial damage, Amanda said, her voice softening with authentic empathy while recognizing that Jerome's current employment represented economic necessity rather than career choice or professional limitation. Ms. Sterling, what makes my situation particularly complicated is that my custody agreement requires maintaining stable employment and housing, Jerome replied, his explanation revealing why exposure of his technical background could create legal vulnerability if his ex-wife claimed he had concealed assets or income potential during divorce proceedings. Are you suggesting that using your engineering expertise to prevent building collapse could somehow affect your custody of Marcus and Maya? Amanda asked, her question reflecting growing awareness that expertise recognition could create unintended legal consequences for people whose personal circumstances made professional visibility problematic. The inquiry revealed the complex intersection of family law and professional recognition, where utilizing technical knowledge could be interpreted as evidence of hidden qualifications that should have been disclosed during financial settlement negotiations. Meanwhile, 14-year-old twins Marcus and Maya Mitchell were experiencing their own challenges with their families' changed circumstances, as their transition from upper-middle-class professional environment to working-class economic reality required navigating social dynamics that their academic achievements couldn't entirely compensate for or overcome. Dad, kids at school are asking questions about why we moved to a smaller apartment and why you're working different hours, Maya said during their morning conversation, her teenage directness reflecting both social pressure and genuine concern about family circumstances that affected their daily routines. Maya, our living situation changed because of the divorce settlement, and my current job provides the stable income that the custody agreement requires, Jerome replied, using age-appropriate language for explaining economic necessity without providing details about legal complexities or professional sacrifice. But Dad, Marcus heard someone say you used to own a company, Maya continued, her 14-year-old curiosity combining with social awareness that their current circumstances didn't match previous family economic status. Why didn't you tell us about your engineering background? The question forced Jerome to balance his children's need for understanding their family history against his concern that knowledge of his professional background could create expectations or social complications that their current circumstances couldn't support. Maya, I did own an engineering consulting company before the divorce, but maintaining that business became impossible after the legal costs and settlement requirements, Jerome explained, providing factual information while emphasizing economic reality rather than professional loss or social mobility. Later that morning, Amanda was conducting her own investigation into corporate policies that had enabled her to remain unaware of employee qualifications that could have been valuable for building safety and operational effectiveness long before structural crisis forced recognition of Jerome's expertise. Sandra, how many of our custodial and maintenance employees have professional backgrounds that don't match their current job classifications? Amanda asked Human Resources Director Sandra Martinez during their emergency review of personnel records. Ms. Sterling, we don't typically conduct background checks for professional qualifications that exceed job requirements, Sandra replied, her response reflecting standard corporate practices that focused on minimum qualifications rather than comprehensive skill assessment. Custodial positions require reliability and basic competency, not advanced technical degrees. Duh, but Sandra, that policy meant we were unaware that we employed someone whose expertise could have prevented catastrophic building failure if we had been utilizing his knowledge for safety assessment rather than just maintenance tasks, Amanda countered, recognizing that institutional assumptions about job classification had created systematic blindness to employee capabilities. The conversation revealed how corporate human resources practices often failed to identify or utilize employee expertise that didn't match formal job descriptions, creating missed opportunities for both institutional effectiveness and employee professional development. As Amanda continued investigating organizational practices that had made Jerome's engineering knowledge invisible until crisis forced recognition, both participants understood that preventing future structural failures would require systematic changes to employee expertise recognition rather than just technical building improvements. Jerome, what I'm learning through this investigation is that our corporate culture created conditions where your expertise remained inaccessible until emergency forced me to listen to technical advice I would normally dismiss, Amanda said during their follow-up meeting about building safety and personnel policies. Ms. Sterling, what I've discovered through this experience is that professional knowledge exists throughout organizations, but institutional hierarchy determines whether that expertise becomes available for decision-making or remains unused until crisis forces recognition, Jerome replied, using insights that custodial work had provided about corporate dynamics and employee capacity. Some moral choices require understanding that institutional effectiveness often depends on recognizing expertise regardless of job classifications, and that crisis management sometimes involves accepting technical knowledge from sources whose professional competence has been rendered invisible by economic circumstances and social assumptions about workplace hierarchy. 3 weeks after structural engineers had confirmed that Jerome's emergency assessment had prevented potential collapse that could have killed over 300 people, Jerome found himself sitting in family court at 2:15 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, facing questions from his ex-wife's attorney about why he hadn't disclosed his continued engineering expertise during divorce proceedings that had assumed his professional earning capacity had been permanently eliminated by career transition to custodial work. Mr. Mitchell, said Sarah's attorney, Patricia Hoffman, her voice carrying the prosecutorial tone that divorce lawyers used when suggesting that opposing parties had concealed assets or income potential during financial settlement negotiations. Isn't it true that your recent identification as the person who prevented the Pinnacle Industries building collapse demonstrates that you retained professional engineering qualifications that should have been disclosed during custody and support determinations? The accusation was both legally sophisticated and personally devastating, exploiting Jerome's decision to use his expertise for public safety to suggest that his acceptance of custodial employment had represented deliberate concealment of professional capacity rather than economic necessity created by legal fees and spousal support requirements. Ms. Hoffman, my engineering background was disclosed during divorce proceedings, but the liquidation of my consulting firm and inability to maintain professional licensing eliminated my capacity to practice professionally. Jerome replied, using careful legal language that acknowledged his qualifications while emphasizing economic barriers that had made technical expertise inaccessible for career rebuilding. But Mr. Mitchell, your recent structural analysis at Pinnacle Industries suggests that your engineering knowledge remained current and valuable enough to prevent catastrophic building failure. Hoffman continued, using logic that transformed Jerome's life-saving intervention into evidence of concealed professional assets that could affect custody arrangements and spousal support calculations. The cross-examination revealed how family court proceedings could weaponize professional expertise recognition, particularly when that expertise had been used for crisis intervention that created public documentation of abilities that divorce settlements had assumed were no longer economically viable. Meanwhile, Amanda Sterling was experiencing her own crisis as board members questioned her judgment in implementing systematic personnel policy changes based on recommendations from someone whose legal complications could create corporate liability if his custody situation affected his reliability or if his ex-wife pursued claims against company assets. Amanda, Jerome's family court situation is creating potential legal exposure that could affect our corporate governance and employee relations policies, warned Board Chairman Robert Hayes during an emergency executive session. If his engineering expertise becomes contested in divorce proceedings, our reliance on his safety assessments could be challenged. Robert, Jerome's structural analysis saved lives and exposed systematic maintenance negligence that could have bankrupted our company through wrongful death litigation, Amanda replied, her voice carrying controlled authority despite growing pressure to distance herself from employee advocacy that had become legally complicated. But Amanda, continuing to support someone whose professional qualifications are being questioned in family court, could create employment law complications that affect our liability insurance and corporate reputation, Hayes continued, using risk management logic to encourage abandonment of personnel reforms that had proved both ethically and practically valuable. The pressure represented institutional tendency to sacrifice individual employees for corporate protection, particularly when those employees faced personal legal challenges that could create public relations complications or insurance liability concerns. As Jerome faced potential modification of his custody arrangement, while Amanda confronted board resistance to personnel policies that recognized employee expertise, regardless of job classification, both participants understood that utilizing professional knowledge for crisis prevention often created unintended legal consequences that could affect family relationships and corporate governance. Later that afternoon, 14-year-old twins Marcus and Maya Mitchell were processing their own anxiety about potential changes to their living arrangements if court proceedings determined that their father's engineering background should affect custody determinations or spousal support calculations. Maya, do you think Mom's lawyer is going to make Dad pay more money because people found out he used to be an engineer? Marcus asked, with 14-year-old directness, understanding that legal proceedings often created financial changes that affected family stability and daily routines. Marcus, I think Dad's engineering knowledge saved people's lives, and that should matter more than whether Mom gets more money, Maya replied, her teenage perspective combining loyalty to her father with growing understanding of how legal systems could complicate family relationships through financial manipulation. But what if the judge decides we have to live with Mum instead of Dad? Marcus continued, his concern reflecting realistic awareness that custody modifications could eliminate their current living arrangements and school stability that they had worked to maintain despite economic changes. The conversation revealed how professional expertise recognition could create unintended consequences for children whose family stability depended on legal arrangements that assumed specific economic circumstances and parental capacity limitations. As their family consultation with Jerome's attorney revealed that preventing building collapse had indeed created legal complications that could affect both custody and spousal support, all three family members understood that crisis intervention often required accepting personal risks that could either improve or destroy their carefully maintained post-divorce stability. "Dad, whatever happens with the court stuff, we're proud that you saved all those people," Maya said during their evening conversation, her 16-year-old maturity reflecting both genuine admiration and protective loyalty during legal uncertainty. "Maya, what I want you and Marcus to understand is that using professional knowledge to help people is always the right choice, even when it creates complications for our family," Jerome replied, using the teaching moment to reinforce values about social responsibility despite personal costs. "But Dad, why should helping people make our family situation more difficult?" Marcus asked, his 14-year-old sense of justice conflicting with legal reality that seemed to punish good deeds through increased financial obligations and custody uncertainty. The question forced Jerome to explain how legal systems often failed to account for moral complexity, particularly when professional expertise was used for crisis intervention that created public recognition of abilities that financial settlements had assumed were no longer accessible. Over the following weeks, as family court proceedings continued while Amanda implemented organizational changes that created formal pathways for employee expertise recognition, despite board concerns about legal liability, both Jerome and Amanda understood that institutional reform often required individual sacrifices that could affect multiple aspects of family and professional relationships. "Jerome, I want you to know that regardless of what happens with your family court situation, your engineering expertise prevented catastrophic loss of life and exposed systematic safety violations that required immediate correction," Amanda said during one of their personnel policy development meetings. "Amanda, I appreciate your support, but I also need you to understand that my continued involvement in corporate safety assessment could create legal complications that affect both my custody arrangement and your company's liability exposure," Jerome replied, offering to limit his professional involvement to protect both family and institutional interests. Actually, Jerome, establishing precedent for employee expertise recognition regardless of personal legal complications, represents institutional commitment to safety that transcends individual circumstances, Amanda countered, recognizing that their collaboration represented principles that extended beyond immediate legal convenience. The exchange reflected mutual understanding that institutional change required accepting personal risks that could either validate or complicate the collaborative relationships that had made crisis prevention possible, while demonstrating corporate values about employee dignity and professional competence. Some personal sacrifices require recognizing that utilizing expertise for public safety can create legal consequences that affect family stability, and that institutional support for employee professional development sometimes conflicts with individual legal circumstances in ways that test both personal values and corporate commitment to personnel policy reform. 6 weeks after family court had ruled that Jerome's engineering expertise constituted maintained professional capacity, requiring increased child support payments, but affirming his primary custody based on demonstrated stability and parental competence, Elena Rodriguez arrived at Pinnacle Industries as the city's lead structural engineer for comprehensive building safety assessment, discovering that the near-catastrophic failure had exposed decades of systematic maintenance negligence that required collaboration between corporate management and municipal engineering oversight. "Mr. Mitchell," Elena said, as she reviewed technical documentation in the temporary engineering office that had been established for building rehabilitation planning, "your initial structural assessment was not only accurate, but demonstrated analytical sophistication that prevented what could have been the deadliest building collapse in city history." Adril. Jerome looked up from safety compliance reports with the careful attention that characterized engineers learning to navigate professional collaboration after years of employment that had rendered their expertise invisible to both corporate management and municipal oversight systems that relied on formal licensing rather than demonstrated competence. "Ms. Rodriguez, I appreciate your professional validation, but I need to acknowledge that my current employment status and recent legal complications may limit my ability to participate in official engineering consultation or municipal safety assessment," Jerome replied, using diplomatic language that acknowledged both personal limitations and institutional requirements for licensed professional involvement in building safety determinations. "Actually, Jerome, the city's investigation has revealed that Richard Brennan's systematic cost-cutting created safety violations that licensed engineers should have identified years ago," Elena said, settling into the conference room with materials that suggested comprehensive municipal review of both corporate negligence and professional oversight failures. "Your custodial position gave you observational access that formal inspection procedures had missed. The assessment meant that Jerome's expertise was valuable, not despite his employment circumstances, but because of them, since custodial work had provided daily exposure to building systems that periodic professional inspections had failed to monitor adequately for systematic deterioration and safety compromise. What specific violations has the municipal investigation identified beyond the structural failures I observed?" Jerome asked, his voice carrying both professional curiosity and growing confidence about contributing to technical analysis that could prevent future building safety disasters. Richard's maintenance reduction program eliminated 70% of preventive structural assessment while falsifying inspection records to suggest that safety protocols were being maintained according to code requirements, Elena replied, her explanation revealing systematic fraud that had endangered hundreds of building occupants for financial benefit. Additionally, the corporate cost structure created incentives for maintenance directors to reduce actual safety spending while reporting inflated maintenance costs that increased both personal bonuses and departmental budget allocations. Over the following 2 hours, Elena presented findings that revealed how corporate financial pressures had created systematic safety violations disguised as efficiency improvements, while municipal oversight had relied on documentation that concealed rather than revealed actual building maintenance and structural integrity assessment. Meanwhile, Amanda Sterling was experiencing her own institutional learning process as collaboration with both Jerome and Elena revealed how executive management decisions had created organizational vulnerabilities that extended far beyond individual negligence to include systematic failures of corporate governance and regulatory compliance. Elena, what specific corporate policy changes would be necessary to prevent future maintenance directors from compromising building safety for personal financial benefit? Amanda asked during their collaborative planning session, understanding that preventing similar disasters required institutional reform rather than just individual accountability. Amanda, The investigation has revealed that corporate cost management systems need fundamental restructuring to ensure that safety spending is protected from budget reduction pressures that create financial incentives for regulatory violations, Elena replied, providing municipal perspective on corporate governance that transcended individual cases to address systematic reform needs. Additionally, employee expertise recognition programs could create internal monitoring systems that supplement formal inspection procedures through ongoing observational assessment by personnel who have daily access to building systems. D. The recommendation represented integration of Jerome's individual case into systematic institutional change, where recognizing employee technical knowledge could create ongoing safety assessment rather than crisis response expertise utilization that occurred only during emergencies. As their alliance expanded to include comprehensive building safety reform and corporate governance restructuring, Amanda, Jerome, and Elena understood that preventing future structural disasters required collaborative approaches that addressed both individual negligence and institutional failures that had made such negligence possible and profitable. Jerome, your engineering background, combined with your custodial observation access, represents exactly the kind of employee expertise that institutional safety requires, Amanda said during one of their policy development meetings. What we need to create are systematic channels for technical knowledge regardless of formal job classifications. Amanda, what I've learned through this experience is that building safety depends on recognizing and utilizing professional knowledge that exists throughout organizational levels, not just among formally designated technical personnel, Jerome replied, drawing on insights that his employment transition had provided about institutional blind spots and employee capacity. The challenge is creating organizational culture that values technical expertise without requiring crisis situations to force recognition of knowledge that could prevent disasters if it were accessible during normal operations. The insight reflected collaborative learning that had emerged from their crisis response, while providing framework for systematic institutional change that could benefit both employee professional development and corporate safety management. Over the following weeks, as Marcus and Maya Mitchell adapted to increased child support obligations while maintaining academic excellence that had attracted attention from engineering scholarship programs, both teenagers understood that their father's professional recognition was creating both opportunities and responsibilities that extended beyond immediate family circumstances. "Dad, my math teacher says that engineering programs are looking for students whose parents work in technical fields," Maya said during their weekend discussion about college preparation and academic planning. "Do you think your structural engineering work could help with scholarship applications?" "Maya, your academic achievements should be evaluated based on your performance and potential rather than my professional background," Jerome replied, maintaining emphasis on individual merit, while acknowledging that family circumstances could create educational advantages or expectations. "But Dad, if your engineering expertise can help prevent building disasters, maybe it could also help other students learn about structural safety and professional responsibility," Marcus added, his 14-year-old perspective combining family pride with social awareness about education and career development. The conversation reflected how professional expertise recognition could create opportunities for broader educational and community engagement while maintaining focus on individual achievement and social responsibility rather than just family advancement or economic benefit. As comprehensive building rehabilitation continued under Elena's municipal oversight, while Amanda implemented corporate governance reforms that created formal channels for employee expertise recognition, regardless of job classification, All participants understood that preventing systematic safety failures required ongoing collaboration rather than just crisis response or individual professional development. What we've discovered through this investigation, Elena announced during the public safety briefing that concluded the municipal building assessment, is that effective structural safety requires recognizing and utilizing technical expertise throughout organizations, not just among formally licensed professionals. Jerome's case demonstrates that employee knowledge can be essential for preventing disasters, but only when institutional culture supports expertise recognition and technical communication regardless of traditional professional boundaries. Some alliances require understanding that institutional safety emerges from collaborative expertise utilization rather than hierarchical technical authority, and that preventing systematic disasters often requires challenging comfortable assumptions about professional qualifications, when building safety and public welfare depend on recognizing knowledge wherever it exists within organizational structures. The crisis that would test every alliance Jerome and Amanda had built reached its peak when Richard Brennan's systematic corruption was exposed through municipal investigation, leading him to sabotage building rehabilitation efforts while threatening to expose Jerome's family court complications and Amanda's corporate governance violations to regulatory agencies that could shut down Pinnacle Industries permanently. "Mr. Mitchell," Richard said, during what appeared to be routine building inspection, but was actually calculated intimidation designed to eliminate the primary witness, whose testimony could result in criminal charges for negligent endangerment and fraud. "I understand that your recent engineering consultation has created some interesting complications for your custody arrangement and child support obligations. The threat was both legally sophisticated and personally devastating, exploiting Jerome's vulnerability about family court proceedings to suggest that continued cooperation with municipal investigation could result in additional legal complications that might affect his relationship with Marcus and Maya, Mr. Brennan. My family circumstances don't change the fact that your maintenance cost-cutting created structural failures that endangered hundreds of lives," Jerome replied, using controlled professional tone, despite recognition that Richard possessed detailed knowledge about his personal legal situation that could be weaponized against continued testimony. But Jerome, corporate executives who rely on unlicensed engineering advice during crisis situations sometimes face regulatory scrutiny that affects their professional liability insurance and corporate governance compliance," Richard countered, shifting threats toward Amanda while maintaining plausible deniability about direct intimidation. The manipulation revealed Richard's strategic sophistication, understanding that effective intimidation targeted the collaborative relationships that made investigation possible rather than just individual witnesses who could be replaced through continued municipal oversight. Meanwhile, Amanda was discovering that her implementation of employee expertise recognition policies had attracted regulatory attention from state labor agencies, questioning whether corporate policy changes represented admission of previous employment law violations that could result in systematic investigation of Pinnacle Industries' personnel practices. Ms. Sterling, the Department of Labor has received complaints suggesting that your recent policy changes represent acknowledgement of systematic failure to utilize employee qualifications in ways that could constitute workplace discrimination, reported corporate attorney David Kim during an emergency legal consultation. "David, our policy changes were designed to improve building safety and employee professional development, not to address previous discrimination," Amanda replied, though her defensive tone suggested awareness that regulatory agencies often interpreted institutional reforms as evidence of prior violations requiring investigation and potential penalties. But Amanda, Implementing expertise recognition programs immediately after near-catastrophic building failure could be interpreted as evidence that previous policies were inadequate for employee safety and professional utilization. David continued, using legal logic that transformed corporate improvement into potential liability admission. The regulatory pressure was both bureaucratically predictable and strategically problematic, since state agencies often pursued cases where corporate policy changes could be presented as acknowledgement of systematic violations that justified comprehensive investigation and financial penalties. As Richard escalated his sabotage efforts by introducing new structural vulnerabilities, while threatening legal retaliation against both Jerome and Amanda, the municipal investigation revealed that preventing complete building rehabilitation would require confronting corruption that extended beyond individual negligence to include regulatory capture and inspection fraud. Elena, we've discovered that Richard has been falsifying inspection reports for other municipal buildings throughout the city, Jerome reported during their emergency safety assessment meeting. The structural problems at Pinnacle Industries represent systematic corruption that could affect dozens of buildings and thousands of occupants. Jerome, that means confronting Richard's corruption could expose municipal oversight failures that affect my department's credibility and the city's liability for systematic inspection fraud, Elena replied. Her professional assessment revealing how individual corruption cases often implicated institutional failures that created resistance to complete investigation. Additionally, Richard has been suggesting that continued investigation represents harassment by unlicensed personnel whose testimony shouldn't be admissible for municipal safety assessment. Elena continued, acknowledging regulatory pressure that could eliminate Jerome's involvement in comprehensive building safety reform. The situation represented systematic corruption that exploited both regulatory complexity and institutional loyalty to create multiple barriers to complete investigation and accountability for safety violations that endangered public welfare. Over the following days, as Richard's sabotage created new structural vulnerabilities that required immediate emergency response, while his legal threats intensified pressure on both Jerome and Amanda to abandon municipal cooperation. All participants understood that protecting public safety required accepting personal risks that could affect families, careers, and institutional relationships. Dad, are you going to keep helping with the building safety investigation, even if it creates more problems for our family? Maya asked during one of their evening conversations, her 14-year-old directness combining concern for his well-being with understanding that civic responsibility sometimes required personal sacrifice. Maya, preventing buildings from collapsing and people from being hurt is always the right choice, even when it creates complications for our family, Jerome replied, maintaining commitment to public safety despite growing legal and financial pressures designed to eliminate his testimony and expertise contribution. But Dad, why should helping people make more problems for us? Marcus added, his teenage sense of justice conflicting with adult reality that often punished good deeds through legal manipulation and institutional retaliation. The family conversation reflected the moral complexity of civic responsibility, where protecting public welfare often required accepting personal costs that affected children whose stability depended on their parents' ability to navigate legal and economic pressures without compromising ethical principles. As structural sabotage created immediate danger, requiring emergency evacuation, while legal intimidation intensified from multiple sources, Jerome faced the ultimate choice between family security and public safety that would determine both his personal integrity and his children's long-term respect for their father's moral courage. Amanda, Richard has introduced new structural vulnerabilities that require immediate evacuation and emergency repair. Jerome announced during the crisis management meeting that would determine whether Pinnacle Industries could be saved through continued rehabilitation or would need permanent closure. But providing continued engineering assessment means accepting legal retaliation that could affect my custody arrangement and your corporate governance compliance. Jerome, maintaining building safety and preventing loss of life represents institutional responsibility that transcends individual legal complications, Amanda replied, recognizing that their collaboration had evolved beyond crisis response to include moral commitment that defined both personal character and corporate values. The decision required both participants to prioritize public welfare over personal protection, understanding that institutional integrity often depended on individual courage that accepted uncertain consequences for maintaining ethical principles during systematic corruption and regulatory failure. Some confrontations with institutional corruption require understanding that protecting public safety often involves accepting personal risks that could affect family relationships and professional security, and that maintaining moral integrity sometimes requires choosing civic responsibility over individual protection when systematic failures threaten community welfare and institutional credibility. 18 months after Richard Brennan had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for criminal negligence, fraud, and attempted building sabotage, Jerome Mitchell stood in his new office at the City Engineering Department as Senior Building Safety Consultant, reviewing employee expertise utilization protocols while preparing for Marcus and Maya's joint graduation from specialized STEM high school programs that had emerged from municipal educational partnerships with engineering firms. Seeking diverse talent development, the transformation was both institutionally significant and carefully earned, since Jerome's transition from custodial work to municipal engineering consultation had required completing updated professional licensing while demonstrating that his crisis intervention expertise could be systematically applied to preventing structural failures across multiple city buildings and corporate facilities. Dad, I still can't believe that saving one building led to reforming the entire city building safety program, Marcus said during their weekend family meeting in the 3-bedroom apartment that Jerome's consultant salary and speaking fees had made possible while maintaining the modest lifestyle that family court requirements and personal values had established as their standard. At 16, Marcus possessed mathematical abilities that had attracted attention from aerospace engineering programs, though his academic success had been balanced by awareness that professional achievement required both technical competence and social responsibility for community welfare rather than just individual advancement. Marcus, what I've learned through this experience is that individual expertise becomes meaningful when it's used for institutional change that helps other people, not just personal professional recognition, Jerome replied, using insights that municipal work had provided about collaborative problem-solving and civic responsibility. The building safety reforms and employee recognition programs represent systematic changes that protect thousands of people rather than just solving one crisis. Meanwhile, Amanda Sterling was experiencing her own continued evolution as her collaboration with Jerome had transformed both her management philosophy and corporate culture at Pinnacle Industries, creating employment practices that valued expertise regardless of formal job classifications while maintaining profitability through improved safety and employee engagement. Amanda, the Employee Expertise Program, has identified 43 staff members with professional qualifications that could be utilized for enhanced corporate operations and safety assessment, reported Human Resources Director Sandra Martinez during their quarterly review of personnel development and institutional reform outcomes. What specific barriers prevented these employees from utilizing their qualifications before we implemented recognition programs? Amanda asked, understanding that addressing systematic obstacles could improve both employee satisfaction and corporate effectiveness while preventing future safety crises. Economic necessity, professional licensing costs, family caregiving responsibilities, and previous employer discrimination appear to be primary factors, Sandra replied, providing data that confirmed Jerome's experience as representative of broader patterns affecting qualified workers throughout the economy. The information revealed how institutional employment practices often overlooked valuable expertise due to assumptions about job classification and professional competence that eliminated potential contributions to corporate safety and operational effectiveness. As Pinnacle Industries became a model for employee expertise recognition while maintaining industry leadership in both profitability and safety standards, Amanda understood that preventing future corporate disasters required ongoing cultural commitment rather than just technical improvements or regulatory compliance. Jerome, your case has become a standard example in municipal engineering programs for crisis prevention through employee expertise recognition, Amanda said during one of their collaborative presentations to city engineering conferences about institutional reform and building safety. What we've demonstrated together is that effective safety management requires recognizing and utilizing professional knowledge regardless of current employment circumstances or social assumptions about workplace hierarchy, Amanda continued, acknowledging personal growth that had extended beyond corporate improvement to include genuine friendship across professional boundaries. The relationship represented collaborative learning that had benefited both participants while creating institutional changes that affected thousands of employees whose expertise had previously been invisible to management recognition and safety assessment systems. Over the following months, Maya Mitchell was completing her final year of high school while developing research projects on structural engineering applications that combined her father's professional influence with her own analytical interests and social awareness about engineering responsibility for community welfare. Dad, my college advisor says that engineering scholarship programs are particularly interested in students whose families have experience with public safety and community service, Maya said during one of their evening conversations about educational planning and career development. Maya, your academic achievements and research interests should be evaluated based on your individual performance and potential, not just family circumstances, Jerome replied, maintaining emphasis on personal merit while acknowledging that family experience could provide valuable perspective for engineering education and professional development. But Dad, maybe my engineering education could focus on preventing the kinds of building safety problems that you helped solve, Maya continued, her 16-year-old perspective combining family pride with genuine interest in structural engineering applications for community protection. The conversation reflected how professional expertise recognition could inspire educational choices that extended technical knowledge across generations while maintaining focus on civic responsibility rather than just career advancement or financial benefit. As comprehensive municipal building safety reforms continued under Elena Rodriguez's expanded department, while Jerome developed training programs for employee expertise recognition across multiple industries, all participants understood that preventing systematic safety failures required ongoing institutional commitment rather than just crisis response or individual professional development. What we've learned through the Pinnacle Industries case, Elena announced during the annual Municipal Safety Conference, is that building safety depends on recognizing and utilizing technical expertise throughout organizations and communities, not just among formally licensed professionals with traditional career paths. Jerome's experience demonstrates that employee knowledge combined with institutional support can prevent disasters while creating systematic reforms that protect public welfare through collaborative problem-solving and expertise recognition. The presentation documented how individual crisis intervention could generate institutional learning that benefited entire communities while providing framework for preventing similar disasters through improved communication and professional development, regardless of economic circumstances or traditional career limitations. 2 years later, Jerome stood in the auditorium of the newly constructed Pinnacle Industries headquarters, watching Marcus and Maya receive engineering scholarships while Amanda delivered keynote remarks about corporate responsibility and employee expertise recognition to an audience of municipal officials, engineering professionals, and community leaders who understood that building safety represented collaborative achievement rather than individual technical competence. Jerome, Amanda said, as their presentation concluded to sustained applause from audience members who recognized the institutional significance of their collaboration. I want you to know that your courage in speaking up about building safety changed not just corporate policy, but my understanding of professional competence and social responsibility. Amanda, what I've discovered through our work together is that expertise becomes valuable when it's used for community protection and institutional improvement, not just individual professional advancement, Jerome replied, using language that honored both personal growth and ongoing commitment to public safety through collaborative problem-solving. The exchange reflected friendship that had transcended crisis intervention to include genuine mutual respect and shared commitment to institutional reform that created systematic improvements for employee recognition and community safety rather than just individual success stories. Some families, they had learned, were strengthened through collaborative commitment to civic responsibility, and that the most meaningful professional achievement often emerged from using expertise for community welfare while building institutions that recognized and supported human knowledge regardless of economic circumstances or traditional career expectations. This story reminds us that building safety and institutional effectiveness depend on recognizing expertise wherever it exists within organizations and communities, rather than just relying on formal credentials or traditional professional hierarchy. Jerome and Amanda's partnership demonstrates that crisis prevention often requires challenging, comfortable assumptions about professional competence, while creating systematic changes that utilize human knowledge for community protection and employee development. Sometimes the most profound institutional reform happens when individual courage combines with collaborative commitment to create systematic improvements that protect public welfare, while demonstrating that technical expertise and social responsibility represent shared values rather than individual achievements.